President Trump sort of hinted that they have discussed it with Putin and that the United States are ready to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. So President Zelensky, first and foremost, needs to understand what is that is offered, and then try to perhaps craft some agreements between the United States, Europe, and Ukraine on how it would look like. This is the most important goal for today.
So as we heard from the Times' Anthony Lloyd just before the news, there is a chance that the talks today in Washington start a process that ends the war in Ukraine. But there are so many questions for Ukrainians. Will they give up territory to the Russian invaders? How can that be squared with their constitution? Can they really trust the West to protect them if Russia attacks again? Kira Rudik is a Ukrainian MP and leader of the opposition Holos Party. Kira, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie, and thank you so much for having me.
President Zelensky asked for this meeting with the US president. What does he need from Donald Trump today?
The first and foremost, he needs an understanding of what are the security guarantees that the United States are willing to provide alongside with our European partners. This has been a complicated question that nobody wanted to tackle all along, because everybody wanted the war to end. But the question of if you make a deal with Putin, how do you make sure that he would not attack us again, was always like a complex question, an elephant in the room that was never actually discussed. So right now we are at the time when it has to be discussed, needs to be discussed, and President Trump sort of hinted that they have discussed it with Putin and that the United States are ready to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. So President Zelensky, first and foremost, needs to understand what is that is offered, and then try to perhaps craft some agreements between the United States, Europe, and Ukraine on how it would look like. This is the most important goal for today.
Are you nervous about the structure of how this has gone so far since Friday? Because we heard from Donald Trump that he wanted a ceasefire first, then there would be a negotiation on land. But what we saw on Friday was actually now a reversal of that. There's been negotiations, or conversations at least, that have taken place between the US president and the president of Russia with no ceasefire.
Yeah, the bad outcome of the meeting, when President Trump, for some reason, decided that the ceasefire is not needed anymore, had its result in Russia attacking us this night with ballistic missiles and drones, attacking peaceful cities of Kharkiv and Odessa. We don't know the casualties amount because the emergency workers are still trying to rescue some people, and we are praying for them. But this is, again, an example of why we need the ceasefire first, because the negotiations can take time and not all people will survive till the time. And this is just absolutely wrong. However, we don't know what happened between President Trump and dictator Putin on Friday, but we know that the ball is kind of back to Ukraine's court again, where he says, so here is the deal, you can take it or leave it. The pressure that President Trump is putting on Ukraine is something that he should have been putting on Russia. And this whole delegation that is going to DC today needs to throw this ball back to Russia's court.
Kira, do you think they can do that? Do you think the might of the people in that room today can shift Donald Trump's stance to actually demand something of Russia? Because we're not seeing any demands being made of President Putin.
We hope that that they will be able to do that. Look, Rosie, we know President Trump. He is playing tough, but there is simply something that he does not understand or does not want to understand. President Zelensky is not entitled to give up any Ukraine's land, right? I know that in the world of big leaders like President Trump or dictator Putin, who don't care about what the people think, in Ukraine, we are democracy, and there is nowhere written that our president is entitled to make deals on Ukraine's behalf on Ukraine's territories. It's a complex legal and political process, even if there was a consensus to give up territories, which is not. So when they're pressuring President Zelensky, it's pretty useless, because even if he comes back and says, I made a deal to give up some territories, it just, no, no, people wouldn't do that. Ukrainians wouldn't do it. Rosie, in 2022, when the world thought that we will go down in 3 to 5 days, right? We didn't give up, did not capitulate. Right now, we are not intending to do that as well.
It was extraordinary. I think people forget, actually. I think, we've forgotten the sentiment and the conversation that was happening 3 years ago, and how actually it is remarkable that Ukraine have put up. You could say Ukraine have lost 20% of their territory. In fact, they have managed to hold on to 80% of it, despite Putin's best efforts. There may be a conversation, Kira, today where President Trump pushes Zelensky to concede the Donbass. And the question that will have to be asked of the Ukrainian people is, at what point do we say we accept a deal that ends the war but costs land? Can you imagine that being the conversation that happens?
So there is a political and a legal answer to your question. To have this debate, even to have the referendum, we need to lift martial law. And for that, we need a ceasefire. This is why President Zelensky was pushing for a ceasefire, not only to stop the killing, but for us to have a legal and political means to have the debate if the pressure from the outside is coming about it. And there is a political question, obviously, that if there is no ceasefire, there is no good security guarantees, why should we cede the land? For Putin's promise to end the war, again, we have been in those ceasefire agreements with Russia since 2014. We had like 20 of them, maybe more, and they never actually honored it. So how do you work with it? How do you make sure that this time is different? And what I believe in this Oval Office path that everybody is so afraid of being repeated today, President Zelensky was trying to deliver the information about our previous factual interactions with Russia, and that you just cannot say, oh, okay, let's just make a deal. You need to have a very strong assurances on what would be the pressure on Russia if they break this deal. So he needs to learn what these assurances could be from President Trump's mind, and then try to discuss of how can we move going forward. But everything that can be done in Ukraine in terms of even like discussions about the territories, which I don't think that will go well, honestly, but it starts with the ceasefire.
Yeah, that has to happen after. I understand that in terms of how you're saying that the choreography of this, how it has to work. Kira, thank you. Kira Rudik, the Ukrainian MP, thank you.
I mean, the only guarantee is NATO. I mean, NATO has been an extraordinarily successful agreement by which there hasn't been an act of aggression on one of those countries that's led to war. I mean, that's not happened for decades. Once you get into the realm then of not NATO, but some form of guarantee support, we're back in the
almost like NATO light.
Yeah, you're back in the Budapest Accords of 1994, which basically where the West promised Ukraine they wouldn't let it be invaded. Well, the Ukraine was invaded. We've seen countless times in history treaties signed between countries that other countries have felt, well, they won't honour them, will they? And war has followed because they didn't respect the existence of those treaties. So do we really believe what's going to emerge from this is going to be a cast iron lockdown guarantee that protects Ukraine in perpetuity from the aggression of Russia?
Stephen Erlanger, the New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent, was saying earlier, lessons have been learned from what happened in 94 and the agreement signed in Budapest. But no one thought at that time, when they signed the agreement, that only a few years later it would sort of dissolve to mean absolutely nothing.
And if you see 7 European leaders scrambling to go to America to talk to Trump, does that look like lessons have been learned? Does that look like confidence that something reasonable is going to emerge?